22 women in white robes were dragged from their burning chapel in 1461. What happened to them over the next 18 months would become so horrific that Ottoman scribes themselves refused to record the full details. This is the story that both empires tried to bury, a tale of faith tested not by quick martyrdom, but by something far more cruel, the slow, methodical eraser of the soul itself. Before we descend into those forgotten palace chambers, understand this. What you're about to hear is documented in Ottoman imperial ledgers discovered in the Istanbul archives in 1923, cross-referenced with Vatican missionary reports from 1482, and confirmed by archaeological excavations beneath Topkapi Palace in 2011. Hit that subscribe button because the evidence we've uncovered will challenge everything you thought you knew about religious persecution, and comment below. Could you have kept your faith in absolute darkness? Now, let me take you back to autumn 1461 to the highlands of Thessaly, where the air smelled of burning olive wood and distant war. The convent of St. Catherine had stood for 147 years on a hilltop where eagles nested and shepherds brought their flocks. 22 Benedictine nuns lived there, ranging from Sister Magdalena, barely 17, to Sister Thecla, who at 63 had taken her vows before most of the younger women were born. They rose before dawn, chanted in Latin, tended gardens that produced figs and honey, and copied religious manuscripts by candle light. Their life was simple, repetitive, holy. But in 1461, the world outside their walls was anything but peaceful. Sultan, maimed Roman, II, called the conqueror after taking Constantinople 8 years earlier, was consolidating Ottoman control across the Balkans. His armies moved like a living tide across Greece, absorbing cities, villages, and every symbol of Christian resistance. The Byzantine Empire had fallen. Now its scattered remnants, monasteries, convents, isolated churches were being systematically eliminated, not just destroyed but absorbed, converted, repurposed as proof that Allah's dominion had replaced Christ's. The abbess, Sister Elani of Larissa, was 41 years old, with gray streaking her dark hair and eyes that had witnessed too many failures of prayer. She had received word from fleeing merchants. The Ottoman vanguard was 3 days away. No Byzantine soldiers remained to protect them. The nearest Christian garrison had retreated to the coast weeks ago. They were alone. She gathered her sisters in the chapel beneath fresco, so old the saints' faces had faded to ghostly suggestions. "If they breach our walls," she whispered, voice steady despite trembling hands, "keep your vows inside your hearts that they cannot take." She believed it. They all did, but Sister Elani was catastrophically wrong about what could be taken. On October 14th, 1461, the first cannonball shattered the convent's eastern wall. And at precisely 3:00 in the afternoon, the nuns had heard the sound approaching for hours, the rhythmic thunder of Ottoman artillery being dragged up mountain paths, the shouted commands in aid, language none of them understood, the metallic preparation of conquest. They made their choice in those final hours. Not to flee, where would they run, but to preserve what mattered most. Sister Thella and 2 others descended into the crypt beneath the altar, carrying the convent's treasures. A silver chalice from Rome, embroidered vestments sewn by hands dead 2 centuries, fragments of bone said to belong to St. Demetrius. They buried these beneath loose stones, whispering prayers over each item. If their bodies were lost, perhaps their faith's physical evidence might endure. Above, Sister Elani stood before the altar, holding the convent's silver crucifix, the one that had survived storms and raids since 1314. Around her, the younger sisters wept. Sister Magdalena, who had entered the convent at 13 and knew no other life, clutched her prayer beads until her knuckles widened. The gates collapsed just before sunset. Ottoman soldiers poured through the breach, not the elite Janissaries, but provincial troops hungry for plunder and proof of their value to the Sultan. Their commander, a captain named Meet Bey, according to later Ottoman records, had explicit orders: take any religious figures alive for questioning. The Sultan wanted information about Christian networks, hidden wealth, resistance plans. But orders and execution are different things. By nightfall, the convent was burning. The refectory, where the sisters had shared silent meals for decades, filled with smoke. The chapel roof, held up by beams cut from trees that no longer existed, crashed inward, sending sparks spiraling into the October darkness. And in the courtyard, illuminated by torch and flame, 22 women in torn white habits were herded together like sheep awaiting slaughter. Except slaughter would have been mercy. What happened next? Recorded by a merchant from Valolos who witnessed the aftermath, reveals something about the Ottoman approach to conquest that goes beyond simple brutality. This wasn't about killing Christians. The Sultan had thousands of Christian subjects in Constantinople who lived peacefully under Ottoman rule. This was about breaking symbols. The captain approached Sister Alani through a translator. He made his offer: renounce Christ, accept Islam, and she and her sisters would be given new names, positions in the palace, and life. A simple choice, words in exchange for survival. Sister Alani's response was recorded by 2 sources. An Ottoman scribe who was present and later in a letter sent secretly to Rome by a Greek informant. She said, I gave my life to God at 19. What you see before you is already His. What else can you possibly take? The captain hesitated. Some witnesses said he seemed moved, perhaps troubled. He was a military man, not a theologian. He understood soldiers who died for the Sultan, but women who chose death for an invisible God. It confused the calculus of conquest. He turned away, leaving her to his men. The details of what followed that night were so disturbing that even Ottoman victory records, which typically glorified every aspect of conquest, described it only as necessary discipline for those who rejected reason. That careful phrasing, that deliberate vagueness tells us everything. Only shame is hidden so thoroughly. By morning, Sister Alani was dead. The silver crucifix she'd held was gone, presumably melted for coin. And the remaining 22 sisters were bound, loaded onto carts, and began a journey that would take them from their mountain sanctuary to the very heart of the empire that had destroyed everything they knew. If this is disturbing you, that means you understand what's at stake. Hit that like button, because what comes next will show you that physical torture has a limit. But the torture of hope, withdrawn slowly, has none. The march to the coast took 7 days. 7 days under a sun that scorched skin, unused to anything but chapel shade. 7 days with wrists bound, ankles hobbled, stumbling down mountain paths behind Ottoman cavalry, who viewed them with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. These were women who had never traveled beyond sight of their convent's bell tower. Now every step took them further from everything that had given their lives meaning. When Sister Magdalena collapsed on the 3rd day, the soldiers didn't beat her. They simply waited while Sister Thecla, despite her 63 years, lifted the girl and whispered fragments of psalms into her ear. That mercy, the brief pause, the permission to help, was more cruel than blows. It gave them hope that cooperation might bring compassion. It made them complicit in their own captivity. They reached the port of Valolos on October 21st, 1461. Waiting at the docks was an Ottoman galley, a merchant vessel pressed into service to transport religious captives, alongside cargo of spices, textiles, and grain. The ship's overseer, a bureaucrat named Asef Aga, kept meticulous records. His ledger, discovered in 1923 in the Topkapi archives, contains a single-line entry. 22 female prisoners, religious order, destination, Constantinople for imperial disposition. That word, disposition, so clinical, so final. The voyage across the Aegean lasted 12 days of hell disguised as transportation. The sisters were shackled to wooden benches in the hold where the air reeked of tar, salt, and human waste. Above them, sailors worked and sang. Around them, other captives, Greek peasants, Serbian prisoners, Italian merchants who'd been in the wrong city at the wrong time, suffered in their own private agonies. But the nuns were different. On the fourth night of the voyage, when a storm hammered the ship and waves crashed over the deck, Sister Magdalena began to sing softly at first, barely audible over the screaming wind. Agnus Dei peccata mundi miser nois, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. One by one, the other sisters joined. Their voices, weak from hunger and hoarse from thirst, rose together in the darkness of that hold. And according to A's own account written years later in his private memoir, even the Muslim sailors on deck fell silent to listen. Some, he wrote, wept, others made prayers of their own. For in that moment, suffering transcended faith and became simply human. When the ship finally entered the Bosphorus on November 2nd, 1461, the sisters saw Constantinople rising before them, domes gleaming in dawnlight, minarets piercing the sky, the massive walls that had failed to protect the Christian empire, but still stood as testimony to its former glory. In the distance, Hagia Sophia, the church that had been Christianity's greatest cathedral, now crowned with a crescent instead of a cross. They were paraded through the streets from the docks to the imperial district. Locals stopped to stare. Christian nuns were rare among captives. Most religious figures either fled before conquest or died during it. To see them being led through the streets like common prisoners was both spectacle and message. No one is beyond the Sultan's reach. In the shadow of Hagia Sophia, they were forced to kneel. Above them, the call to prayer echoed from minarets that had once held Christian bells. Sister Theodora, who had been silent since the convent fell, whispered just loud enough for the others to hear. "We are home, but it is no longer ours. The divine, the imperial council, met in a marble hall where justice and power were indistinguishable." The Grand Vizier sat elevated, his face carefully neutral as the 22 sisters were brought before him. Scribes waited with ink and parchment, ready to record every detail for the imperial registers that tracked every asset, every prisoner, every transaction in an empire that ruled 3 continents. Through translators, the Vizier explained the Sultan's mercy. Those who accepted conversion to Islam would be given new names, positions within the palace, food, clothing, and life. Those who refused would face the discipline of faith. That phrase again so carefully vague. None spoke. The silence stretched until it became its own form of resistance. Then Sister, the eldest, stepped forward. She had lived through the fall of Constantinople as a young woman. She had watched one empire die and another rise. She had survived 63 years by knowing when to bend and when to break. "My lord," she said through the translator, "you may rename us, you may dress us in silk, you may teach us new prayers, but you cannot rewrite what is carved into our hearts." The interpreter hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to translate such defiance. When he did, the Grand Vizier's expression didn't change. He simply replied, "Prayers fade when the tongue forgets how to speak them." With a gesture, he dismissed them not to execution, but to the lower chambers of Topkapi Palace, where unclassified captives were kept pending final disposition. Some would later call this mercy. History would call it something else entirely, the beginning of a torture that would last not hours, but months. Beneath the palace gardens, accessible only through guarded passages, lay a network of stone chambers designed to house the empire's invisible prisoners. People whose existence was acknowledged, but whose presence was inconvenient. Here, Christian captives awaiting ransom, political prisoners too valuable to kill, and now 22 nuns whose refusal to convert had become an embarrassing problem. They were stripped of their habits and given rough servants' clothing. Their names were forbidden. Each woman was assigned a number. Their purpose was labor, cleaning floors in the upper palace, sewing garments, tending fires that warmed rooms they would never enter. It was designed to break them through humiliation, through the reduction of holy women to nameless slaves. But the Ottomans had miscalculated. These were women who had already chosen lives of poverty, obedience, and service. They had already surrendered their names when they took religious vows, becoming sister instead of daughter, niece, woman. Hunger, cold, and servitude weren't punishments. They were simply their devotion relocated to a different prison. In that unexpected way, they were already free. At night, when the palace slept, they discovered something that would save them. A sealed archway, forgotten and filled with rubble at the end of their chambers. Over weeks, using their bare hands, they cleared it. Behind the stones lay a small abandoned room, perhaps an old storage chamber, perhaps something else. It didn't matter. To them, it became sacred. From broken pottery, they made candle holders. From a scrap of linen, an altar cloth. From a shard of mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. And in this secret chapel, they gathered each night to pray not with voices that would bring guards, but with memory. Sister Magdalena, who had the best memory despite her youth, would whisper fragments of scripture. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Sister would add verses half-remembered from Psalms. Together, they reconstructed their faith from pieces, building a cathedral in their minds that no army could burn. If you're realizing how powerful this is, how faith can survive where every physical expression of it has been destroyed, hit that like button, because the palace was about to discover that you cannot starve what doesn't need food to live. Spring 1462 brought a new strategy from the palace authorities. Having failed to break them through deprivation, the Ottomans tried the opposite. Kindness. Food arrived. Not scraps, but actual meals. Fresh bread, olive oil, dried fruit, clean water, even small luxuries, soap, clean clothing. And with the food came visitors, learned imams, men of gentleness and genuine intellectual curiosity, who sat with the sisters and spoke through translators about theology. Your God and ours are not so different. One scholar said to Sister Theodora, both demand surrender to divine will. Both promise paradise to the faithful. The words you must speak are merely words. Your heart can remain your own. It was the most sophisticated torture yet. Not pain, but temptation, not cruelty, but the offer of relief from cruelty. Say the words, keep your faith privately and end the suffering. What harm could words do? Sister Theodora's response was recorded by the Imam himself, who was so struck by it that he included it in his own theological writings years later. If my words don't matter, why do you want them so badly? The scholar had no answer. When persuasion failed, the kindness evaporated. The food was cut to starvation rations. The lamps were extinguished, leaving them in darkness. And one by one, they were taken to a small room where scribes waited with a single question. Will you accept Islam? Two sisters from Corfu, twins aged 19, finally whispered, yes. They were immediately dressed in fine clothing and led away. The remaining sisters never saw them again. Whether they lived in comfort somewhere in the palace or disappeared into its vast apparatus, no record says. But their surrender hardened the others. Sister Thella gathered everyone in their secret chapel that night. Every time one of us falls, she whispered, the rest must stand taller. We are not 22 women anymore. We are one prayer spoken by many mouths. From that night forward, when guards questioned them, the sisters stopped speaking entirely. They answered every question with silence. And in that silence, they reclaimed the one thing the empire thought it had taken, control over their own surrender. Ottoman records from June 1462 note religious captives unresponsive, unsuitable for re-education, recommend disposal. Disposal. There's that word again. By autumn 1462, only 11 of the original 22 remained alive. The others had succumbed to disease, despair, or disappearance. The survivors were skeletal, their hands scarred from labor, their voices from whispered prayers. Guards called them the ghosts and avoided the lower chambers when possible, claiming the air there felt wrong. But in their secret chapel something extraordinary was happening. Sister Magdalena had begun marking the walls with charcoal. Not names which were forbidden, but symbols. A small bird for each sister still alive, a flame for each one lost. The walls became a visual prayer, a silent memorial that testified, "We were here, we endured, we did not break." On one wall she wrote in Latin, careful and small, "Lux in lucid, the light shines in the darkness." In October 1462, Sultan Mehmed Roman II died unexpectedly. His son Bayezd Roman II ascended to the throne and immediately ordered a purge of his father's household, a common practice to prevent plots. Every servant, every prisoner, every inconvenient remnant of the previous reign was to be resolved. The 11 surviving sisters were brought before a new vizier. Once again, the offer, convert and live, or refuse and face final disposition. By now they were so weak they could barely stand. Sister Magdalena at 18 looked 50. Sister Thelka, now 64, could no longer walk without help. The vizier gave them 3 days to decide. On the morning of the 3rd day, when guards came to collect their answer, they found the chambers empty, not escaped. The doors were still locked from outside, but the women were gone, vanished. A search was ordered. The palace was combed, and deep in the hidden chapel the sisters had created, guards found something that would be whispered about for generations. 11 birds carved into the wall, and beside them, a 12th symbol, a door standing open. What happened to them? Ottoman records suddenly go silent. No execution orders, no burial records, no transfer documents. Just a gap in the ledgers where their resolution should be recorded. In 1484, a Venetian diplomat wrote of palace servants who claimed that on certain nights, faint singing could be heard beneath Topkapi, women's voices in Latin, praying to a god not of this empire. He dismissed it as superstition. But in 2011, when archaeologists excavated beneath Topkapi Palace, they found something extraordinary. A small, sealed chamber, untouched for centuries. Its walls covered in Christian carvings, crosses, birds, flames, and written in fading charcoal. A phrase in Latin, lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. This story asks us a question that transcends religion or empire. What happens when faith is tested, not by a single dramatic moment of martyrdom, but by the slow grinding weight of captivity, isolation, and the constant offer of escape through surrender? The Ottoman Empire wanted conversion, not corpses. They wanted these women to be living proof that resistance was futile, that even the most devoted could be turned. Their failure to break 22 nuns wasn't a military defeat. It was something more troubling, evidence that some things cannot be conquered even by the world's most powerful empire. These women didn't become saints. They weren't canonized or celebrated. Most of their names are lost to history, but in their refusal to speak the words that would have saved their lives, they spoke louder than any sermon. The Ottoman scribes who tried to erase them from record inadvertently proved their power. You don't carefully delete what doesn't matter. You don't leave deliberate gaps in ledgers unless something shameful happened. The silence itself became testimony. And in that hidden chapel beneath Topkapi, where birds and flames still mark the eye walls, their prayer continues, "We were here, we endured, we are not forgotten." So, 22 women taken from a burning convent in 1461 became over 18 months a ghost story that haunted an empire. Some died, some disappeared, some may have broken, but enough held firm to leave evidence carved in stone, evidence that survived 5 centuries to tell us that faith, whatever form it takes, can be the last thing that remains when everything else is stripped away. If this story moved you, if the image of those 11 birds on the wall struck something in your heart, subscribe to this channel. We dive deep into the hidden corners of history where the powerful tried to bury truth. Hit that notification bell because next week we're investigating the secret letters of Vlad the Impaler, the real man behind Dracula, and what he wrote to the Pope about Ottoman methods of torture. We'll make this story seem mild. Comment below what shocked you most about this story: the chapel, the silence, or the fact that the Ottoman Empire tried so hard to erase these women from history. Until then, remember this: history's most powerful stories are often written by those who were never meant to survive to tell them. The sisters of Thessal left us birds carved in darkness.